The County Conversation podcast is sponsored by Daffabet, the world's leading online betting site. To find out more, visit daffabet.com. Hello and welcome to the County Conversation, the show where we take the three most interesting stories from the last week of county cricket and give you the inside track to them here. I'm Cameron Ponsonby.
I am Nick Friend.
You can tell by that ever so slight delay that we've been separated again this week, which is.
I thought you were going to say it's 8. I thought you were going to say it's 8 o'clock in the morning.
No. I don't. George DeBell does this, where he leans into the idea that we're not fresh in the morning. My light was out by 11, and I'm ready and raring. But it's a jam-packed week and a jam-packed day, so we're having to do this from different sides of the river in London this week. And it's also a bit of a change-up for the episode as well, because for our 3 topics, we've got 2 interviews for you, as well as a review of the first Kookaburra round of County Championship, which, well, it's not been popular. But our first interview is with England women's national selector, Lydia Greenway, and then we'll have the new Middlesex head coach, Dane Vilas, on the show. Nick, it's a double-head interview week for you. First up, spoke to Lydia Greenway.
I did. Yeah, I did. We wanted to. We said last week that this is really weird fortnight in the women's domestic calendar, where there's no cricket at all. Because I think essentially, because the men's and women's blasts are aligned, when the men's blast stops for a couple of Champo rounds, I suppose the women's domestic game kind of looks around and goes, so what do we do now? So what's happened is that in the India tour, India are here playing some tour games pre-series. New Zealand A are here on tour as well. So there's an England A team and England Development 11 both playing. But broadly, if you're not in those teams and if you're not in the England's senior side that's about to start playing against India, there's kind of this little break. So it felt like a really appropriate time to get someone on the show to, I suppose, to sort of not so much review the first half of the season, because we've kind of done that every week, but to talk around it in a way that hopefully other people couldn't. And in that sense, getting the national selector, Lydia Greenway, who's new to her post, who's probably watched more domestic women's cricket than anyone apart from Charlotte Edwards in the last few years, on to come and talk about what's gone on the last few weeks, but also what she's now looking for in her role. Yeah, it felt like a really good idea. And to be honest, I hope the segment of this interview that we're going to play now is really interesting for that. We're playing about 15 minutes of a half-hour interview, the rest of which you'll be able to read about on thecricket.com. She was, anyone who knows Lydia, she was typically insightful and great, and really open and interesting on a role that she's the first of her kind in the women's game. Obviously, there've been national selectors in the men's game for years around English cricket, but this is the first sort of full-time national selector role that has existed in the women's games. Until now, it was very much captain, coach, performance director. But speaking to something that we've talked a lot about on here, the increased depth in the women's domestic game now means that you kind of need that national selector role, because it's not open and shut, and it's not, you're not just picking from an essentially contracted batch and sort of turn your nose up at the domestic structure underneath. What Lydia said is almost, and what you'll hear in the interviews, that almost her job is less about telling Charlotte Edwards who to pick in the squad tomorrow. It's much more about feeding back into who can go onto a long list for 2 years down the line.
Nice. It is worth keeping an eye on the scorecards of the 2 kind of England Development and England A teams that are playing at the moment. England A against the full India side, they've been playing some T20s at Beckenham. The names on show are incredible. And it does kind of both for the England team and the India team. India are playing their full strength side. And then when it comes to the my main conclusion before we go on to Lydia is that if I was a female professional cricketer, I'd want to be the 35th best player in the country and go to Italy for 2 weeks in this period of time, because that's, as far as I can tell, what all the rest of them have done, and quite rightly so.
I'll tell you the one thing that stuck out yesterday, looking at the A scorecard against New Zealand A, and this is something I'm sure we brought up on here before, but I've certainly written about in the past. There were 4 left-handers in England's top 6.
Oh.
And it's sort of like you wouldn't say they were saying that. You wouldn't say they're being subtle about what they're trying to find. But Lydia Greenway is basically the last left-hander to bat in the top 6 for England in any cricket, barring the odd game that Freya Kemp's played. But so to see Grace Scrivens, Jodie Grucock, Freya Kemp, and Karis Pavley all in the top 6 against New Zealand Day on Thursday. This is I would describe as instructive.
Lovely.
And if you look at that A team, actually, it was a lot of what I've just touched on there. This long list thing. The four left-handers, the top 6. Hannah Baker, who's a leggy who does put sort of side spin on it as well. Phoebe Turner, young quick at Durham. You don't have to go far to work to work out the kind of things that England are looking at for their medium to long term.
Right. Well, let's find out more from the national selector herself. Here is Lydia Greenway.
Well, no, we are very fortunate to be joined this afternoon/morning, whenever you listen to this, by Lydia Greenway, who is the national selector, which I feel like is a grand title, isn't it? I mean, and an appropriately grand title. I guess first up, broad question for you, but like, what does that mean? What's it like in reality? I know that your selection meetings, when you sit down as a panel, are yourself, Charlotte Edwards, Jonathan Finch, performance director, Claire Connor, managing director of England Women's Cricket, and then a whole scouting team beneath you as well. So, what is your job? What does it look like in reality? What are you selecting as you, or are you selecting or are you sort of feeding into a wider group?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I guess that the headline part of my role is to obviously play a part in picking the England squads for every tour that we got coming up and World Cups and things like that. And that's alongside the panel that you've mentioned. Underneath that are the scouts as well. So for each skill set, we've got a lead scout who will be out watching the games and sort of keeping tabs on certain players. And then beneath that, there's even more scouts underneath them, so who are sort of filing in reports, whenever there's any sort of women's cricket going on. And so, yeah, that's my role. The headline stuff is helping to pick the squads for England. But I think I'd argue that just as important part of my role is to keep an eye on the future, is to look at that in the next sort of 2 to 5 years, potentially, where are we going to have some gaps in the England team moving forwards. And so I think that's where a lot of my time will be spent, is watching the domestic cricket going on, and there's been lots of it, which is great. And obviously always watching the England games as well. So a lot of cricket watching, Nick, just like you.
That's the dream. That must be an interesting role when you're looking at players who are performing now and not necessarily looking at them for now, if you know what I mean. I mean, Cam and I spoke last week rather on this podcast, talking about Esme McGregor, who at the time of chatting last week was the leading wicketaker in the Blast for Essex, and the leading run scorer was Ella McGackin, who I believe since then has picked up a little injury. Both uncapped players, both really interesting. I think McGackin's sort of been on the radar for longer than McGregor. But yeah, using those two as examples, but I think speaking to a wider pool here, how does that bit work? Is that the interesting bit for you? You're not necessarily looking at these players in a way that we're used to 3-4 years ago, right, well, who's performing best in the circuit? We've got to get them in now. Are you almost throwing them onto a long list for, as you say, for 2-3 years down the line?
Yeah, I think exactly that. And I think that the main reason for that now is we just have so much depth within the women's game. Gone are the days, and I would have fitted into this category when I was playing. I showed a bit of talent. I had probably a decent season or two, and then I was in the mix as a 17-year-old. And I think what we're seeing now is, and potentially what we're going to see moving forwards is the age profile of an England women's player hopefully become older, because there's that ongoing competitiveness, there's that ongoing depth in competition. And so in theory, it should be harder to break into the England side. And yeah, I think that's why it's really exciting, is because we could earmark these certain players, but it might not be that they put on that England shirt, for a good couple of years. So but having said that, you never know what's going to come through. Sometimes you do get that generational talent, and some people are just ready.
Can I ask, we're speaking at quite an interesting time in the season, which we never get in English cricket, which is this sort of 2-week block without domestic games. I think it's because the alignment with the men's blast means that when the men's blast stops, the county championship returns to the men, and for the women, what we've seen instead is, I think you're at Derby today watching the A team. and there's been Development 11 in India. The India tourists are over here, and New Zealand A are over here as well. So this feels like a really good time to sort of assess the season so far. Like, does the process you described there, can that be sped up at all by, I guess, like the level of performance you've seen so far this season? I mentioned those two players before, but we've seen a mountain of runs and a fascinatingly competitive competition, I think, particularly in the 50 over. I suppose twofold for you. Like, has that surprised you? Sort of the way that it feels like we've moved on so quickly from the Hale Flint Trophy that was cut. But B, I don't know, have players sort of forced your hand a bit in a way that maybe you didn't think they would do so quickly?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's been really pleasing to see is obviously the quality of the cricket that we've been seeing, and I think there's a number of factors for that. I think clearly having the England players involved in the domestic competition is a massive plus, and I think that just elevates the standard of cricket. So when you see someone go out and score 100, you know it's a really good 100.
Yeah.
You know it's been against a good bowling attack, good quality opposition. So that in itself carries a lot of weight. I think in terms of being surprised, I think one thing that I've been really pleased about is being able to have the time to properly watch some of these players that have been mentioned. You mentioned Ella and how well she's been playing. And I've never had the time. I've always seen snippets of what players have been doing, all over the country, but I've never just had time to sit and watch them properly. And that's something that, part of the role clearly requires, but it just helps you understand them a bit more as a player, which is really helpful.
Can I ask to that point? Does the way you watch cricket now differ from when you were doing it as a commentator? Like, I don't know. Like, and I suppose like secondary to that, are you now picking games to go to based on certain individuals that you want to watch?
Yeah, I mean, I'm watching all, or if not as many of the domestic games as I can. The streaming's brilliant now, and there's a platform that we can use where, I can log on and I can just pick a player and watch what they've been doing recently. But I don't think you can be actually going to a game because, yeah, I think you're right. I probably do watch it a little bit more differently now. Aside from watching a batter go out, who's the bowling attack, what field have they got set, all that sort of stuff. I think you do pay attention to the smaller details as well. How well do they run between the wickets? How is their body language? What are they like with their teammates? How do they respond when maybe they're having a bit of a tough day? So I think suddenly there's a bit of a different lens on the way that I watch the game. But in terms of just cricketing performance, that hasn't changed too much.
And are there certain skill sets you're looking out for? You could go and watch any game in the country at the moment, and you'd see an opener, two openers probably in the game who could cut it at England level. But obviously, take the ODI team, we've just seen record-breaking stats from Tammy Beaumont, Amy Jones. As much as you're looking towards the long term, are there particular roles and skill sets that the one that I always used to throw around was, I guess, yourself, wasn't it? As that you were basically the last left-hander to bat for England. I mean, barring a couple of games from Fred Jones. Fred Jones is not a person. Fred Kemp, and Eve Jones has been. I don't think has Eve Jones been capped? I can't remember if she has, but Eve Jones has been around for years, and Grace Scrivens has appeared on the radar. But obviously, no one has done it since you. I think Tash Farrant, until very recently, was still the second leading run scorer left-handed in T20s up to T20Is for England with 7 runs or something. So would I be right in assuming that left-handers is one thing you're looking at? I suppose leggies on the back of the Ashes and seeing the damage that Lana King did as someone who really, rips it with side spin. Like, are there particular roles and skill sets that you are being asked to come back with, I suppose, when you go into these meetings?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're always just looking for talent, and obviously, I guess regardless of what they do, if you see a talented cricketer, then you've got to keep an eye on them. But yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the things that I feel is important is, as I mentioned just at the start of our chat, is we need to make sure that we're ready. Particularly if you look at our England side at the moment and you look at the age profile of certain roles, you could suggest that our middle order, at some point, as much as we would love them to go on for as long as possible, the reality is that they're going to retire at some point, and maybe at different stages. So yeah, we have to be ready for those sorts of things. And obviously another part of the game which we know is important to have lots of depth in is our fast bowling stocks, because
Yeah.
through the nature of what they do, there's going to be injuries and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I think there's some roles which might or could be prioritised moving forwards, but yeah, I don't think you can lose sight of the fact that if there is that talented cricketer there,
Yeah.
then you have to make sure that they're also given as much opportunity as possible. But yeah, I think as people know, left-handed batters are pretty high up on the agenda of Charlotte Edwards' list at the moment.
Well, there's no easy way of phrasing this, I suppose, but I think we all expect India to provide a sterner test of England than the West Indies did earlier this summer, I suppose, just because of the nature of resources and where the women's game is at in particular countries. I mean, despite Hayley Matthews' extraordinary best efforts, I mean, what's the best way of putting this? Are we reaching a point now where the domestic structure is in a place where actually you can almost look more at the value of runs in some, if we take a game involving a full strength Blaze side, for example, we're looking at Beaumont Jones, Kirsty Gordon, Georgia Elwes, Sarah Glenn, Natsiva Brunt. That must be Catherine Bryce, Sarah Bryce. That'll be 1,200 plus international caps. When I mean, if you take that versus the level of inexperience in that West Indies side that just toured a number of youngsters, we're almost looking now at a situation where the domestic structure is stronger than some of the international sides that England play. And I suppose does that, to what you said earlier about elevating hundreds, elevating performances, does that, I don't know, like do you take a different level of notice now, perhaps, to we did 2 or 3 years ago when you're analysing domestic performances, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Do you
I mean, that's
mean so
disparage.
domestic?
I don't mean to disparage like the international game, I suppose, but you
Yeah.
take the calibre of some of the names in some of those domestic games versus the inexperience on show in some of that West Indies series, for example. I don't know. Like, do you? I suppose how do you analyse performances on these different stages now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So there's a lot. So at the ECB, and this is all new to me in terms of what I've seen and how like the guys at the ECB go about things. But
Yeah.
the words cricket intelligence is something that I'm getting used to as well. So Liam, who's at the ECB, he does a really good job at the packs that we get sent are so thorough. So using the West Indies series as an example, that takes in all the data, all the factors that should be considered, and can sort of measure the performance that we had against them. So like what our expected wins should be, and if we go above that. So I think off the top of my head, the wins that we had against the West Indies were higher than expected. So I think clearly the team just want to go out and win a series and win it as best as they can. But I think there's a way that it can be measured, and you're probably asking the wrong person as to all the ins and outs as to how they churn out what a win should be. But there's all of that stuff in the background, which I think can help keep you on track. So when you are playing, as you say, it's hard to phrase it, when you are playing maybe a side who don't challenge you as much as some of the bigger teams, you know where you are with those wins. And then clearly when you come up against someone like Australia, they're sort of the benchmark at the moment, I guess. And we want to make sure that we're on par and, hopefully getting beyond them at some point.
Is the increase in depth in the domestic game one of the reasons? I mean, Lottie has made such a big point at the start of her tenure about playing county cricket, being selected on the back of what you do in county cricket and the value that she sees in it. Are those interlinked? Sort of, I guess, almost knowing how high that standard now is, and almost seeing that as, in a way, like your own like homegrown England A. You almost got this sort of like deeper England A competition going on.
Yeah, definitely. I think, back in the day, you would, if you scored runs, people would say that it only really had weight if you did it against, say, someone like Sussex or Kent, because they were the two strongest counties. But if you got them against, and this is again no disrespect, it's just how the women's game was. It was dominated by 2 or 3 counties for a long time. So suddenly 100 or a fifer against another county, didn't carry as much weight. Whereas I think now the county game, 100 against any of those county sides is a very, very good 100. And you look at the bowling attacks of most of those counties, if not all of them, there isn't that fourth or fifth bowler anymore where you can think, right, as a batter, this is where we cash in because we've seen off the openers and their first change or whatever. Like, I don't think that is much of a thing anymore. Or if it still is, then I don't think it will be much of a thing moving forwards. And I just think the county game now is in such a strong place. I've been watching so much of it, and it's it's been great. And the fact that the women are given the facilities that they should be given as well is really important, and that includes how the pitches are prepared too.
The Cricketers' award-winning team brings our subscribers news, features and insight on county and international cricket every single day. You can try us now by signing up for £1. Yes, you heard that correctly, just £1 at thecricketer.com/digital.
The Kookaburra is back. We kind of previewed it last week, and it's finally made its return. And it's not been a particularly happy return to the county championship. I was hoping that the kind of conversation around it was going to change a little bit, because last year it wasn't enjoyed very much. But that the reasoning given then was it's April, they're feather beds, it's the wrong time of the year to be playing with it. Next time will be different. We've got a block of 4 now. We've only played one of the four rounds to be used with this ball, but we've only had 2 results out of 9. One was a bit of a mismatch between Worcestershire and Surrey, the team bottom of Division 1, and the team now kind of, back on the charge for a 4th title in a row, and Middlesex losing to Northamptonshire after a pretty generous declaration. Anthony McGrath, Yorkshire's head coach, had this to say: the match as a whole was not a great watch for spectators. Yorkshire were taking on Nottinghamshire with the Kookaburra ball, and I'm still not sure why we are using it, to be honest. We don't play Test cricket in England with a Kookaburra, and if we're thinking about the next series in Australia playing with a Kookaburra, then the people who are going to play in that series probably need to be using it as well. And that basically speaks to the point that you raised last week, slightly in slightly kind of tongue-in-cheek fashion, to be honest, where it was a case of, well, hang on, if it's the England lads who need to be using this Kookaburra ball to prepare to go away to Australia, they're all playing for England at the moment. So, and vice versa, if you're an English teamer currently trying to get into the England team, you're going to be using a Kookaburra when it is the Duke's ball. Nick,
Yes.
is this I was waiting for this to be the Goldilocks moment of the Kookaburra experiment, where we find it's just right and it's just a little bit of change and whatever is fine, and this is going to be its home for the years to come. It feels like people don't want it. Will this experiment come to an end at the end of this year, next year, whenever?
I don't know. I mean, to go to that point about the tongue-in-cheek comment last week, I think it was tongue-in-cheek because also we do know that preparing the current England team is not the sole or principal reason for introducing it. It's partly to try and, as Rob Keir said many times, it's trying to develop and trying to find the next guys who, they'll be going. I'm sure, England look at these rounds hoping that someone, Eddie Jack, for example, at Hampshire, did run in and bolt quickly for Hampshire against Essex, and it does force the odd selection like that to try and compel teams to win differently, and that bit, that bit stands. I suppose, as you say there were 2 results. One of them was, Northants did win differently, and that Middlesex just gave them a declaration that I always thought looked a bit, not ropey, but almost more a donation than a declaration in a way. Like, we know that these pitches aren't deteriorating very much. We know that the ball doesn't do very much. And if you've got little to play for towards the bottom of Division 2, of course, you're going to try and chase it on the final day. Whereas at New Road, ironically, probably the one ground that does regularly produce result pitches, whether they want them or not. So they're almost the exception to the rule here, I suppose. And do I think it'll end? It's interesting because if we end up with a structure, I do wonder if you look at I do wonder if they come out with a domestic structure next year that is full of integrity, let's say, full of sporting integrity. I wonder whether they go, we've got this now that works the competition. We're not including that. But I do also think that a large part of this round's Kookaburra issues sort of fall on something else we spoke about last week, which is where the schedule fits into these Kookaburra rounds. Because actually, what we've got is featherbeds of a different kind. We've got tired pitches being produced by tired ground staff who've produced 8 lots of blast pitches in the last 2.5 weeks on the back of 7 Champo games in 8 weeks. We've got, and likewise, we've got players who are off that same schedule. So you've got players who aren't fresh enough to run in and bowl at 100% for the 4 days that you need to bowl at 100% before the Kookaburra. I interviewed Matt Milnes last week, the Yorkshire bowler, who's just back fit after a 3rd stress fracture in 3 years. And you can read this piece on thecricketer.com now. His 3rd stress fracture was basically caused by last year's Kookaburra rounds at the start of the season on those April featherbeds, and caused partly because he was coming back to competitive cricket on the back of the previous stress fracture at the end that ended his previous season, but also because of, but in combination with the pitches at the start of last season, which were featherbeds. And as he said to me, you cannot bowl at 75% as a seamer on these pitches with this ball. And of course, that is the reason the ball was brought in to stop bowlers being able to do that. So there is this chicken egg vicious circle thing going on. But from a player's perspective, this is the bit that they will say doesn't fit with what England are trying to get out of this, which is that the whole structure currently doesn't allow you to be at 100% when the Kookaburra is used, either right at the start of the season or right now on the back of this run of games. So you end up, as we saw in the week, with Liam Patterson-White bowling 62 overs in the first innings for Nottinghamshire, Johnny Bairstow bowling. I hate it when that happens because it does make a mockery of the championship, I always think, doesn't it? Like you look and go, oh no, if Johnny Bairstow is bowling on a stream, everyone's watching this going, this is probably not good cricket. And to that end, someone, let's call him a source close to that game, described that game at Trent Bridge between Nottingshire's Yorkshire and Yorkshire as the worst game of cricket I've ever seen, and I've seen a lot of games. That is the... Go on.
Well, I was going to say, because we mentioned Anthony McGrath talking about that match off the top, the actual scores on the doors, which I should have given you guys to begin with. Nottinghamshire started with 487 from 130 overs. In reply, Yorkshire got 510 from 185 overs. They've scored 510 at 2.7s, which is a real tough watch, which is where Liam Patterson-White took 3 for 146 off 62 overs. And then Nottinghamshire, in reply, got 148 for 1. So 21 wickets.
Right, keep going, Liam.
Yeah.
Liam,
have another one.
Another one?
And
Hasib Hamid bowled.
Hasib Hamid bowled, Davin Milan bowled, Johnny Bairstow bowled, Dan Moriarty opened the bowling in the final innings. And I think I've got kind of 2 points to add and potentially conclude with. First of all, a moment of great hilarity in Yorkshire's massive innings of 510 off 185 overs. Adam Lyth facing the first ball of the innings nicked off, which is a real tough watch. You then saw Finlay Bean get a double 100 at the other end. But I guess, first of all, the reduction in games, the expected reduction in games next year, if we're still moaning about this next year, then I'm going to be annoyed. Because I'll be like, well, let's just add the games back in. If we're going to lose games, this should create people who are fresher and prevent this problem.
And
if
pitches,
we lose the games,
that are tailored better.
Correct.
Pitches that are better tailored to this. Because I'll say one thing on the pitches for this round, that are more than one. Because everyone's trying to work out how to produce results on a Kookaburra with a Kookaburra ball. So Chelmsford, they played on a used hybrid. There was another hybrid used somewhere. That was
off the top of my head.
I think Trent Bridge was a hybrid as well. Gloucestershire produced one that spun, and they nearly got a result, but that was out of a generous declaration that looked like it was going to backfire as well. The problem with a hybrid, of course, is that hybrids are designed not to deteriorate. So if it doesn't do what you want it to do, which presumably is deteriorate, then you end up with this game that doesn't progress at all. So you've got a ball that goes flat, a ball that goes soft, and a pitch that
doesn't change either.
No, I mean, I remember last year being at Bristol when they used the hybrids, I think from the Kookaburra rounds, and it did deteriorate. And No, sorry, it didn't deteriorate, but it bounced. It bounced. That
Yeah,
was
I remember this. This was
and it was
kind of
great.
widely credited. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, mainly by me, but it was
Okay.
because I was there. But it made for interesting cricket. It was still a draw, but the problem is, well, the supplementary problem is that no one has quite worked it out. And McGrath, of course, was at Essex until this year, and he was part of the Essex. He led the Essex team that actually did win games because Sam Cook is the Kookaburra bowler, the Kookaburra seamer. So I don't recall him saying this last year, but I think what you get is when these games don't work as
They become
spectacles.
bad.
Yeah, George
And my
Bell
second
wrote to that end
thought process is
yesterday as well.
my second thought process is, and it came largely from the fact that Anthony McGrath, and your point was like, this is kind of designed for developing bowlers 2-3 years down the line. I guess it's kind of the point. If they are bad, if people aren't able to get wickets with the Kookaburra, potentially A, because they're tired, but B, potentially in the eyes of Rob Key or the powers that be, seamers aren't skillful enough to make the ball move off the straights or have learnt these skills to remove batters and make the Kookaburra
I
talk.
don't know, like,
But no, we do know. This is the
no,
point.
but I was going to. Well, can I throw
The
one name
exercise.
into you?
Okay.
Will O'Rourke,
Yeah.
who we know can bowl with the Kookaburra.
Yeah.
22 overs, 2 for 113 in the first innings, and the second innings, with the game completely dead, he only bowled 4 overs. There are examples. You know, he's 6 foot plenty, bowls
Yeah.
pretty close to 90 miles an hour, and bowls the Kookaburra back home in conditions where it is obviously better suited. Like, you know, that there are enough examples going around of guys who, Mohammed Abbas is a genius. He's not 90 miles an hour, but he is, I think, pretty broadly agreed, one of the most skillful seam bowlers in the world. He bowled 20 overs, 1 for 40. So he's not gone for anything. He bowled 104 dots in 120 deliveries. I wasn't there, but I'm going to assume a lot of those have also come in like the second half of that innings, where one of the things that happens with the Kookaburra is when it gets soft on a sad pitch, no one can play cricket. You can't score runs.
Well, this all sounds like a disaster, basically. I don't. Okay, why can everyone else use the Kookaburra around the world? We're going to move on. I'm being Kookaburra'd to death, much like the latest round of county championship. There we go. How's that for a segue, for a tangent? Nick, one result of the weekend, one of the 2 results was Middlesex versus Northants. Northants won by 4 wickets after a very generous declaration by Middlesex on the final day. It was the first match in charge for new Middlesex head coach Dane Vilas. They've had a bit of an upheaval, a restructuring, a rejigging.
They've had a week.
Exactly. They've had a week north of the river, which is where you are, and you spoke to Dane Vilas, and your conversation is coming up with him right now.
Can you just talk to us about what you've done since retiring from playing? Obviously, you finished with Lancs at the end of the 2023 season, and you played in Pile Royals, I think everyone's saying, in that following spring's SA20. But it's essentially 18 months that I suppose county cricket fans would have last seen you. What's life thrown at you? What have you done? What have you been doing until last week, I suppose?
I've been quite busy, to be honest. First and foremost is reconnecting with the family, getting back, touching base with them, and just being part of the family, helping out my wife with the kids. We've got 2 young children, so getting back to them, making sure I don't come and mess up their routines too much, and sort of reintegrating back into that, and just being a normal family, if you want, for a little bit, which has been fantastic. And that's been my main focus, doing that, giving Pippa an opportunity to grow into her job and her role, which has been also brilliant because she sacrificed so much for me. So doing that, but then outside of that, obviously still want to be part of the game, still wanted to learn and grow as much as I can and get some experience. So did a little bit of corporate stuff, went around about the business of sports and the business of cricket, which has been fantastic. Did a couple of sort of semi-like internships, if you will, and understanding that and just figuring out what I want to do next. But mainly the last probably year really has been focusing on working. I did a master's in sports directorship and learning how to understand the backroom behind the scenes of playing. So working at Wimbledon Cricket Club and working with a fantastic director of cricket there, Jonathan Speller, who's shown me a huge amount and how actually things go at a cricket club. Running the sort of the admin side of things, making sure that the coaches are on top of things, fixtures, blah, 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 all those sort of day-to-day things of how a good club works, which has been amazing. Then doing that, also getting into coaching, like I said, connecting with the family. My son is an avid cricket player, so he's been dragging me down to nets and in the garden and doing all this other stuff. So coaching him, doing all of those things, seeing how his passion, everything has sort of reignited that passion for coaching, because I initially stopped and didn't do any of that post cricket, but now doing that, now also getting into more team involvement, getting understanding of schools and how junior cricketers and cricketers work in schools, and then also doing a little bit of one-to-one coaching with players who are wanting a different set of eyes and a different experience, has been fantastic. So just a broad range of coaching has been really good, but also always keen to explore and learn and take new ideas. So that sort of answers your question. Quite a lot, actually. Been busy, but main focus is just being at home as well.
How like when you finished playing, was head coaching on your radar? I mean, I think even on LinkedIn a couple of weeks ago, you posted about, I suppose, I guess all of the unanswered questions that come with retiring from a playing career and trying to work out what comes next. And so I don't know, was this something does captaining, give you that desire to sort of want to continue leading in that way after playing, or has this sort of come about through, I don't know, through circumstances and the opportunity rather than being something you're necessarily searching for?
No, it's definitely not something I was actively searching for. Obviously, something like this is something that anyone would strive for, and I think any player or anyone who is involved in cricket or coaching would love to be doing that. So I knew that this might be something I'd like to look at in the future, and I didn't realize it would happen this quickly, which is a fantastic. And I think it's just opportunity. So get lucky in a situation, and if something presents itself, you've got to take that. I think something with captaining and managing different teams, you are involved in coaching and leadership in such a way. And I've always enjoyed leading teams or speaking to people about leadership, and trying to grow in that arena and environment. So I've loved that. So this is just circumstantial and worked out really well, and very fortunate that I could be in the position where both Middlesex and myself were in a position where we could make it work, which was fantastic.
Am I right in saying that? You've continued living in? So do you live in Wimbledon as well with the family?
We live in Rains Park, so near Wimbledon. Yeah.
And did that go back to your playing days as well at Lanc? So you didn't move there post playing?
No. So my first 2 years of county cricket was playing for Lancashire, and then going back for 6 months to play in South Africa. So doing the double summers, which is the dream for a lot of people, which is great. Happy to have that opportunity. Like I said, got 2 small children now, so as they're getting older, that becomes a lot harder. Moving them around is unfair. So getting them settled in a place, in a school, and then also with Pippa trying to get some work and getting her settled and giving her that opportunity to do that. I love Manchester. We love Manchester and being there. But unfortunately for us, we didn't really have any network or connections outside of the cricket space. So for me, it was an easy one. For Pippa and the family, not so much. But we were very fortunate that her mom and her family are her sister and her 2 brothers live in London. So that made it easy for when I was away or when she was down here, we could just do that. And I think also, to be fair, we've got quite a good network. A lot of friends and people who have moved over come down to, seems like there's hundreds of thousands of South Africans in and around Rains Park, Wimbledon, Putney. So it's quite a good network here, a bit of a home feel for us here. So it just made sense for us to be down here, and we've loved it, and it's been fantastic.
And what does this job look like? Obviously, you've got limited time, I suppose, between now and end of September. but even more generally as a county head coach, like, how much of it is coaching and how much of it is, I don't know, sort of like human leadership? And I suppose, is that where the benefit of having played until very recently comes in, and sort of knowing the challenges that the county schedule throws at players?
I think so. I think, as players, these guys, we've got a very, very talented squad. You don't need to do huge amounts of coaching, otherwise they wouldn't be in the position that they're in anyway. Obviously, everybody needs to learn and grow. I mean, even I remember when I was playing towards the back end, you're always tweaking something, and as bad as you get a little bit caught in your head, and you're always looking to find the best step, and as you should, because you always need to improve, and get better, as we all do. So I think a little bit goes to the coaching and finding those small little tweaks and nuances within your game. But for me, I think it's more about, just the leadership stuff, trying to get the players on the right path to realize their potential. Because, like I said in the past, we've got some huge potential in this team, but just trying to eke that out of them to really get them to think and focus and, back themselves to go out and play and just do as well as they can. It is obviously difficult in this stage for us now within the season to come in and get amazing results, and everybody wants that. Even looking yesterday, we were looking to try and push and try to get some good results. But I think the main thing for me is to try and focus and get them to play good cricket, and change the way they play to really challenge themselves. And if we can get all those sort of things right, then hopefully the results can take care of themselves.
And just lastly for you, like, what I don't know, how is it? What's it like coming in? I suppose at the time that you have done, because I guess when this job's available, obviously Richard Johnson's been moved on in the first place. Like, is it? I don't know. Like, what's it like coming into that new club, particular club where you don't have, sort of like prior links, or if you know what I mean. Like, how do you play that as the incomer, as it were? Is it okay? I know you were there for that blast game against Essex on the Thursday. Do you come in and sort of try and lie low and watch from afar, or is it like you also know that you're only, this season's halfway through already, so you kind of do have to come in and sort of make your voice heard quite, straight away? Which one is it?
Yeah, I know it is tough. Thankfully, I've moved around a little bit and come into new teams and new environments, so it's not too foreign. I also think it's also quite good to take a step back, come from a new, different perspective and different set of eyes, and coming in and working that. I think for me, it's more about just working with the leadership group, working with the captain, the coaches now, working with the players themselves, of trying to challenge their identity and how we're trying to get ourselves moving forward to be better. It is a bit difficult, but you don't want to come in and sort of push the buttons too quickly or too fast, or go and do something outrageous. But you also want to try and make a difference and see where you can help and improve. And that's sort of what I'm going to do is, obviously observe and make sure that the team are in a good space. Don't want to rock the boat too much. But if I see something that I feel could potentially help or change, I'm not afraid to go out and speak to whoever. And I think, we've got that opportunity. But I think the main thing is just staying authentic to who you are. I'll try and install some of the things that I think have worked well for me in past change rooms, what we did really well when we were playing at Lancashire. Obviously different times and different team, but there's always a couple of key fundamentals, key like non-negotiables that I like to work with. And if I can try and input that into any of the players and to the team and to the staff, we can get that working. And if they like it, then hopefully that's great. Just want to try and do as well as I can. And it's like I said, it's a fantastic opportunity. A couple of months towards the end of the season, and just give it a good crack and give it a full go, which is amazing.
Dane Vilas there, and runs for two of they're not the new boys because they've played for Middlesex for a number of years and they are both Middlesex juniors, but new boys for this season, Joe Cracknell and Josh DeCares, both came into the side and got runs. The cricket draft, Nick, would you be looking to get old Crackers and JDC, as I call him, into your 11?
Yeah, I mean, why not? It's the Kookaburra round, so as you've said, everyone will score some runs. No, I mean, Joe Cracknell came in to keep wicket, replacing Jack Davis, and made his first professional hundreds, batting at 7. Actually, take Middlesex for a pretty. I mean, talk about results. They were 160 for 6 on the first day before Joe came in, and made a really meaningful 100 actually. So, and Josh fell 13 short in the second innings, but for both those guys, they're both the last year of their contracts. A couple of weeks ago, you kind of look at it from the outside, and you probably think the writing's somewhat on the wall if you're not getting a game basically, and you're out of contract at the end of the year and what have you. But so in a way, I think Dane's arrival comes at like a perfect time, because actually, if you come in as an interim coach, fresh, no link to the county prior, all he can pick on is what he sees. And Josh and Joe in the last month, particularly, have done. I mean, I don't think this is exaggerating. I think they've got a mountain of second team runs, which, given their personal situations, professional situations, I suppose, around their contracts, the future of the game and stuff, I think, like a really remarkable effort. And if you are that interim coach and you come in, and you've obviously come in because the results aren't working, I think you just look around, don't you? You go, right, well, who's getting the runs? Pick them. Yeah. And you can only take the chances. It's one thing to be given the chance. It's a whole other thing taking that opportunity and to do what they've both done. I'm A, chuffed for them. I said before, I've known Joe Cracknell for most of his life, and yeah, like it was quite emotional watching it, to be honest. And then Josh, similarly, he's got 1 million runs in twos this season, but hadn't played very much cricket. And Josh bats, he bowls, and Joe bats, he keeps. And if you're looking at cricket draft players, you want your multifaceted cricketers. I suspect Joe certainly will continue in the Blast, because he played the Blast game against Surrey on the Friday preceding the Championship game. So if you're looking at both formats for your draft sides, and of course, as per last week, we should probably touch on the Australian Kookaburra experts, mainly the off spinners: Todd Murphy, Corey Rocky-Keole.
Give Liam Guthrie some love. 7 for against the Middlesex lads.
Yeah, 9 the match. So basically, what we're saying is,
pick
if you're looking, pick Australians. Pick the guys who know how to use the Kookaburra, so Rocky-Keole, though, worth a pick at Warwickshire for these 4 games, as reported first by thecricket.com.
It all bodes well for the Ashes. We're going to lose 5-0 again.
To off spin.
We're going to use a Kookaburra.
Just the 3 off spinners.
Corey Rocky-Keole, Todd Murphy, Nathan Lyon, spinning us in an absolute web.
And then Liam Guthrie is going to be tempted back into the Australian fold after his year of recuperation with Darren Lehman.
Right. That's everything for this week. The County Conversation podcast is sponsored by Daffabet, the world's leading online betting site. To find out more, visit daffabet.com. I've been Cameron Ponsonby. Thank you as ever to Nick Friend, as well as Lydia Greenway and Dane Vilas for joining us this week. And we will see you and speak to you again next week.